Hey, fellow heathens, and welcome back to the podcast. I'm Previn Tierson, and with me, as always, is Abba Umirison, and welcome to the fucking show. We are going to be reading a bit of the creation story from the Poetic Edda. If you'll explain a little bit on that, Abba.
So the story of Valthrithnismal, Odin's contest with the Riddle Weaver, and this translation by Jackson Crawford, and this will be stanza 21. And the creation story itself, which before I go any further, this story itself is a contest between Odin and the Riddle Weaver, who's a giant, and they're going back and forth to see who is the wisest and has the most knowledge. And in stanza 20, Riddle Weaver asked Odin, how did the earth come to be? And which one was the first giant? And so, as I read, this is what the Riddle Weaver said. The earth was made from Ymir's flesh, the rocks were made from his bones, the sky was made from the skull of that ice giant, and the sea was made from his blood. So that was the stanza. Something they left out from some other sources I've read, and other people can attest to this too, is that Ymir's hair became trees. That was just something I thought that they left out. But yes, that was the creation story. Well, a little bit of a part of it when after Odin, Villian Ve killed Ymir, and that's how the earth came to be, was his body, basically.
So what do you think that might be a literal or metaphorical story?
I see it as both, as in I do believe that, that he had a titanic, body, and that it was big enough to where when he was slayed, that his body did become the earth. But I also believe that it could also be metaphorical in a sense of, because he was a giant and he was a Thurzer, that they are the more primordial stuff, the elements. They are the harshest of the harsh of elements, I guess you could say.
Right.
It's not like when you have rain coming down, it's not the little droplets. It is the storms that destroy things. That's the metaphorical side, I guess, that I could put it as.
Right. So I've always really pictured the story as being a metaphor for how the earth was made. I'm always open to interpretation and learning. So of course I haven't been a Norse heathen for very long, so I'm learning all this as I go, and it's a very interesting story. So to hear your perspective on how it could be both is quite interesting. I think it's also quite interesting how, you say Ymir's hair was the trees, and that Odin created humans from the trees, so we kind of have a connection with Ymir within us.
I strongly agree, and also too in the story, when they talk about in another book, I forgot which one it was, but when it talks about the creation story of humans, and not just the earth, but the creation story of humans, when Odin is creating them, it says driftwood that he's using, but when the earth was created, after him and his brothers had already killed Ymir, well, obviously we all know, where does wood come from? Trees.
Right, trees.
So there is that connection there that's kind of, some people tend to overlook. What do you have to say to that?
I think it's quite fascinating. We always try to see ourselves as part of nature and having a particular divine spirit, a connection with forces greater than ourselves. And the fact that, we could possibly be created from the very body of Ymir would actually plant us firmly into that, that deep connection with nature and the magic of nature and their essence, so to speak.
Yeah, and also too, he is what you would call in some books, he is the great primordial ancestor, because out of him as well became the first Thurs. Which I say Thurs because Thurs and Jotun are different. Jotun came later. They're still giants, both of them, but the Thurs are the most primordial ones. Surtur, Ymir, Bolthorn, Bergelmir, Thrudgelmir, and there's more to Besla. Besla would also be considered a Thurzer because she's primordial. No, don't quote me on that actually. But so Jotun would be more of where people say Buri was the first god, but I guess you could say he is more like a Jotun though, because even in the stories, it is said that he looked like Ymir's kind, but he was a lot smaller. And the way he was formed, or he was created, was Aldumla, the primordial cow, licking the ice.
Right.
And so when he emerged from the ice, like I said before, that's where I also say it was different. Where yes, they're still considered giants, but he was a lot smaller. And so after them intermixing, with the Thurs, so on and so forth, generations past. You get Odin, you get his brothers, and then you get more and more Aesir, you get more Vanir. And to me, too, some of the early Thurs, like even what you would say the sons of Muspelheim, when Surtur during Ragnarok is supposed to, ride onto Asgard, his sons, or the sons of Muspelheim in general, they don't intermix with any of the gods or the giants. They are strictly in Muspelheim, and same thing with the powers of Niflheim, the frost giants, ice giants. But Jotun, though, in people's, probably, I guess you could say they emerged them with a proto-cosmic, because Thursday would be considered anti-cosmic in some ways because of them causing Ragnarok. That's just another perspective, I guess.
So I guess would you say the main difference, that's the main difference between a Thurs and a Jotun? The Thurs is more primordial and anti-cosmic, and the Jotun. So that's really the main difference. There's not a whole lot of other differences.
Yeah, I would also too. Before I say anything else, the anti-cosmic side, that is not coming from a satanic or Luciferian side. Not that I have a problem with satanic stuff. That's all good, but Norse paganism, or even dark Norse paganism, the worship of giants and whatnot, that has nothing to do with satanic stuff. What I mean by anti-cosmic myself is, I guess you could say, referring to Ragnarok, because that in itself would be going against the cosmos.
Well, that was my point, and a lot of people don't seem to understand that even Odin and his brothers and Thor, they all have Jotun blood, so they all have some giant in them. So these beings all intermingled.
Yes, very much so. And even too, when I have also heard, humans should never worship or honor the giants, and I guess to me that kind of makes no sense, because even in the stories, Odin went to them to gain knowledge. So that's another point I've wanted to bring up, just because I've heard that a whole lot, especially with like the Brosatru stuff. They only worship Odin and Thor, and every other god or goddess is good, and then the giants are evil and Loki's evil.
Yeah, well, that also brings me back to yesterday's episode, because we were talking about racism. Only our religion is for Europeans, as some people would say. Well, as you can tell, the gods also intermingled with other species of divine creature. To say that we, can't mix is just asinine. It makes absolutely no sense. It's in the stories. They mixed. Why can't we mix? It makes absolutely no sense. So yeah, I had to bring that back up.
Yeah, it's a good point to bring up. But also now to bring on more mixed races of divine creatures, the Aesir and the Vanir. The Aesir, as people more so know them as Odin, Thor, Freya, even though she's Vanir first and foremost, but she had been traded over the Aesir. But Aesir have been known to be more of the war-like gods, and Tyr being one of the main gods of war alongside Odin.
Right, and Tyr is mostly considered, even though he is part of the Aesir, he's also Jotun.
One other story would say something that he was Odin's son, but
I've read some stuff on that. Most of the main stuff that I've read on that doesn't really support that, though. So
yeah, and I would agree too. I definitely strongly believe that he is definitely a giant and was born from them, but joined over to the Aesir. And then obviously people know the Vanir as being the more agricultural gods, having to do with more not just agriculture but magic too.
Right, and the Aesir more, like you said, war and battles and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I would actually advise people to look more into the Vanir, because again, like we've said about the Brosatrus and all that stuff, they only look into the Aesir, where there's so many more deities. There's so many gods and giants throughout this whole pantheon. I mean, it is crazy. Once you read all the stories, it is wild to think that there is this many deities in a pantheon. I mean, I know in Greek, in the Greek pantheon, you have the 12 Olympian gods, and then you have, I forgot how many Titans you have, but it's definitely, that even so is nowhere near the amount of deities, gods, giants, and whatnot that you have in the Norse pantheon. I would strongly suggest people look into every single part of the pantheon. You never know what you might feel connected to, who you might feel connected to, and why. bring you on a different path.
The people that worship or follow mainly the Aesir, they're Asatru, is that correct?
Yeah.
And then what would you call the others?
Well, there's one for the Vanir, it'd be Vanatru. It's not really well known, but Vanatru's there. There's Thursatru for the Thurzer. There's Rokatru, which is like Thursatru because it is the worship of the giants, but is solely focused on Jormungandr, Fenrir, and Hel. And also Loki, too. The bringers of Ragnarok. That's why they're called the Roker. And then also, I've heard this one time, I don't really know anyone that practices it, but Jotnar True.
Okay, I was about to ask, what would they call that?
Because Jotun is singular, Jotnar is plural.
Yeah, I had absolutely no idea that was even a thing, so...
What would you say that you, what if you can tell the listeners, what kind of path would you say you're on? Because, we know you're a Norse pagan mostly now, but is there any differences that you'd say that differ from your typical Asatru?
Well, I definitely don't consider myself Asatru because my patron is Tyr, and I know he's Aesir, and he's also Jotun, but my matron is Hel, and she is Jotun. I do honor the Aesir gods, and I even honor the Vanir gods, and I've honored some Jotun. And I do believe I've even honored some Thurs a time or two in a bloat. So, I feel like I'm quite eclectic when it comes to my heathenry, so I never call myself an Asatru. I'm just a heathen. That way I can encompass the entire belief structure, and I don't have to focus just on one particular set of beings or deities. And I think that is fine with them. I've had no backlash from it, so I think they're okay with it.
For me, at least, I'd say I'm the same way. Pretty eclectic. It's differed. Since I became a pagan, it's different. First, obviously, a lot of people follow the Aesir gods first, and then I came to the Jotun, and then to the Thurs. Not so much with the Vanir, but I do want to explore that more. But now my path it's changed to the point where it can involve bits and pieces of all of them. You could say it's almost like evolving, I guess. One thing that's always been a constant is my patrons and matrons. I guess I don't really have one. If I had to choose, probably Odin, because he's always been a constant, even if he wasn't actually there or I wasn't worshiping him or honoring him at the time. It's always been a subconscious thing too, as well. And I always tell people as well, like I said earlier in the podcast, was it not with the honoring the Thurs and trying to gain knowledge from them? Was it not Odin that did the same thing?
Right, he went to them for knowledge.
Was it not him that gave these great sacrifices for knowledge?
Right,
hanging himself, taking out his own eye. So I urge people to explore the different deities. Truly.
Yeah. And like I've said in the introduction episode of this podcast, I didn't start as a Norse pagan. I started as a Celtic pagan. So I even still honor some Celtic deities from time to time. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. There's power there and there's power here, And it's also in my blood. I have some Celtic blood in me as well as I do some Norse blood and it's mostly Northern European. I'll have to do a DNA test to find out forever. What is that? 23andMe or whatever. But I don't know how accurate that stuff is.
And Ancestry.com. You got My Genome. I wouldn't say it's not completely. Obviously, it is science, but at the same time, that DNA field is it's a fairly new concept
right.
for DNA testing. That is for us.
Right.
And it's so hard because, again, how we always talked about people mixed with each other for thousands of years.
Yeah.
You have wars, you have migration periods, you have every single thing. So DNA tests are cool. I think I don't really pay attention to it as much. I pay attention to the ancestry, of course, but what's more important to me is if I could actually find my ancestors' names and
right.
where they came from. That,
right.
to me, matters the most. A percentage doesn't mean shit to me.
Right. And that's mostly where I get my information from, is actually tracing back parentage. I'm in the group in Facebook where we do that, and I can trace my parentage all the way back to Normandy, all the way to Norway, England, Scotland. It's quite fascinating when you actually see their names on paper, and sometimes you see pictures or draft cards or stuff like that. So I think, when you're immersed in several different cultures and it's in your blood, I think drawing from those different cultures is quite okay. And there's definitely power within those cultures, and I don't discredit anyone's religious background when it comes to stuff like that, because obviously whether you come from an African background, an Asian background, or European background, seeing the things that these people can do, and what they know, their shamanistic beliefs and stuff like that, even the Native Americans, watching their rituals and stuff, just beautiful and powerful. You can just feel the energy. So it doesn't really matter where you come from, or what pantheon you draw your power from, as long as you have that connection. Then I think it's okay to mix a little bit here and there.
Yeah, no, I could agree with that too. I haven't really honored, I guess, other deities from other pantheons. I have a couple times in the past, and in fact, I have a few statues, but more for the sake of, because I don't honor and worship them constantly, but it is more of like mementos, because they're the first ones I ever knew of in school, growing up. To me, that just is more of that for that reason. I would like to read more about some, though, because it's always interesting.
Most definitely. And of course, we can always highly recommend new Norse pagans to look into the Poetic Eddas, the Prose Edda. And specifically, I like Dr. Jackson Crawford, but there are other translations. You just have to find what you're comfortable with. That's the best way to learn the information about the Vanir, the Aesir, and the creation stories, and the heroic sagas. It's all there, and it's really convenient. You just sit down and you read it, and it doesn't matter how many times you read it in anything. You can always kind of find something new, and to me, that's fantastic.
Another book I could recommend too is by Wilhelm Gronbach. He is I think it was Danish, but he what was the book called? The Culture of the Teutons, the Teutonic people, some of the first Germanic tribes that we ever have on record, and it goes into their culture, what they did on a daily basis, what their laws were, how some rituals were set up, and it mentions the Icelandic sagas in there, and it goes into such huge detail. I'm not even finished with it yet, because I was reading another book as well, but the detail it has in it is crazy. And this guy, the author is, I think he's dead now. I think it was like early 1900s he died, but great book so far, and I can't wait to read even more. So yeah, I'd also recommend for people too to go look at the older works, the Codex Regius, and go look at the older stuff that people have written from in the older times. Was it Jacob Grimm in the Teutonic mythology? Yeah. There's 4 books. Some of it is in another language, so you'd have to probably get a translated copy, but still highly recommend it. I have one of the books. I don't have the other 3 yet, so once I get those, I'll be starting up those. That'll be nice.
Yeah, that'd be great. I would love to look into those. I've not read any of those books. I definitely would like to.
Yeah, the saga of the Jomsvikings, Vikings. I forgot the author. That was a good short book. It was only like maybe not even 90 pages long,
And maybe in the description of this episode, we can put links to those particular books if anyone really wants to look into them, and they can use those links to, Amazon, whatever. Go purchase them.
Yeah. I am going to be ordering a book here soon called The Hanged God by Shani Oates. I've heard great things about it. It's a book about Odin, of course, the Hanged God. There's also another book about him called The Left Hand of Odin, and then another one from Shani Oates. It's called The Wolf's Head, Odin, the Ecstatic God of Tethers. It's mainly about ties with the wolf and the shape-shifting part of it too.
Right.
So every moral of the story, every single book, more than likely, almost every single book you'll read about the old gods and the cultures and stuff, it's gonna have good information in it. Even if you find some things that aren't accurate, that doesn't necessarily mean that the whole thing is not accurate. Everyone makes mistakes.
Yeah, we're definitely pulling from scraps and bits and pieces of material that we have left over from the age of the high time of this religion. So I mean, it's to be expected that some mistakes will be made and some inaccuracies will happen. I mean, there's really nothing we can do about that. We're doing the best we can to piece it together.
And I, for one, am excited. I will say, especially because this is number 4.
Yeah.
Fourth episode?
Yeah, 4th episode.
Yeah, we'll have the other 2 by next weekend as well.
I'm gonna try to see if we can get a special guest on for the next episode. I'm not gonna reveal any information right now to the listeners, but I'm gonna really try. So
yeah, that'd be pretty cool. And we could hear his point of view, or her, whoever it is we have on.
Right.
And if they have been a pagan for longer than we have, that'd be even better, because then, more knowledge the better.
Yeah, it'd be a great Q&A.
Yeah.
So do you have any other information?
Other information, I would say, I can't really think of any. I mean, obviously encouraging people to read books.
Yeah, definitely. And like I said, we're gonna add some links into the description, and hopefully that'll help the listeners find what they're looking for. But again, if you like the content, just give us a follow on all of the podcast streaming platforms, and you can get a hold of us at thesouthernheathens@gmail.com. That's all one word, thesouthernheathens@gmail.com. And hopefully by the end of this weekend, we will have our website and our Facebook page ready to go. And if you did like the content, again, give us a follow, and we will see you next time.